The first thing that hits you isn't the punch, it's the sound, that dry, sickening crack of bone on bone, echoing through a cramped underground ring while a crowd of strangers roars like they've just seen a miracle and a car crash at the same time. Elbows slice through the air, knees drive into ribs, and for a moment you forget you're watching choreography at all. It feels like you stumbled into a ritual where the human body is both weapon and prayer. But this story doesn't really begin in that smoky fight club. It starts far away from the neon and the gambling, in a dusty little village where the most important thing in the world isn't money or fame or even survival. It's the serene stone face of a Buddha statue called Ong-Bak in Nong, Pradu, an impoverished rural community in northeastern Thailand. That statue isn't just decoration. It's protection, identity, and history carved into sacred stone. When its head is stolen in the night, it's not treated like a theft. It's treated like a disaster. That's the world this film throws you into, a place where faith has weight. The villagers gather around the mutilated statue, their voices shaking, their bodies bent in panic and grief. You can feel how fragile their lives already are. Drought, poverty, uncertainty, and now even their spiritual anchor has been violated. In that moment, the stakes are crystal clear without a single speech explaining them. If Ong-Bak's head isn't brought back, it's not just bad luck. It feels like the village's soul has been ripped out. Enter Ting. He's quiet, almost shy, raised in the temple, trained in Muay Thai, not as a sport to show off with, but as a discipline he promised never to use in violence. He's the kind of hero who doesn't swagger. He bows, he listens, he lets elders speak first. But when he volunteers to go to Bangkok and bring the statue's head home, the decision carries a different kind of power. It's the moment when a man whose whole life has been about restraint decides that, if he has to fight, he'll do it for something that truly matters. On paper, it sounds simple. A gifted fighter from a rural village travels to the big city to retrieve a stolen Buddha head from a criminal network. That's the basic plot of Ong-Bak, Muay Thai Warrior, a 2003 Thai martial arts film directed by Pradu Pinkayu, with stunt choreography by Pana Ritikrai and a breakout lead performance from Tony Jaa as Ting. But the way this story feels is anything but simple. It's mythic and raw at the same time, like a fable that's been dropped into a back alley and told with blood, dust, and gasoline. To understand why this world is so gripping, you have to look at Muay Thai itself. This isn't the floaty, wire-assisted spectacle that defined a lot of early U-2000s martial arts cinema for international audiences. It's a style built on impact, knees crashing into chests, shins whipping across thighs, elbows tearing through guards with terrifying efficiency. In Ong-Bak, every strike feels like it comes with decades of training and centuries of tradition behind it, as if each blow is carrying both physical force and cultural memory. The film doesn't just feature Muay Thai, it centers it, treating the style as the beating heart of its world. Visually, you can feel the contrast between where Ting comes from and where he's going. Nong Pradu is shown as humble but deeply rooted wooden houses, open fields, dusty roads, a temple that looks like it's been there longer than anyone can remember. The village's life literally orbits around Ong-Bak, this ancient statue watching over them in quiet silence. Bangkok, on the other hand, is chaos, cramped alleys, tangled wires, markets buzzing with scams and desperation, underground rings where men bet on pain. The movie doesn't just tell you that Ting is out of his element, it makes every location feel like a test of whether his beliefs can survive the city's corruption. And that's where the central hook of this story really lives, not just in fists and flying knees, but in the collision between tradition and modernity. Ting isn't just fighting gangsters. He's fighting everything that threatens to hollow out what his village stands for: greed, exploitation, the idea that sacred things are just another commodity to be smuggled and sold. The stolen Buddha head is a perfect symbol. On one level, it's a literal object, a carved stone head taken by criminals to be traded like any other black market item. On another level, it's the embodiment of spiritual protection, community identity, and the old ways that are quietly being swallowed by the city. That tension runs through the way the film was made too. Released in 2003, Ong-Bak hit at a moment when action cinema around the world was leaning heavily into visual effects, wire work, and stylized fantasy. Instead, this piece leans hard in the opposite direction: practical stunts, jaw-dropping physicality, and a sense that gravity is a challenge to wrestle with, not an inconvenience to ignore. Reviewers and critics weren't just impressed. They talked about Tony Jaa as the next major martial arts star, a performer whose athleticism and Muay Thai technique felt like a thunderclap announcing a new era of Thai action cinema. So when you watch that first big showcase of Ting's abilities, it doesn't feel like a random fight thrown in to wake up the audience. It plays more like a thesis statement about the world. Here's a man who has promised not to use his skills casually, suddenly forced into an arena where violence is a form of entertainment and currency. Every elbow he lands, every flying knee he drives into an opponent's chest is framed against the knowledge that he's not supposed to be doing this at all. His Muay Thai isn't just technique, it's a sacred trust being bent and maybe broken because the world he stepped into doesn't share his sense of restraint. What's fascinating is how tightly the film weaves physical danger and spiritual stakes. We're used to action movies where the MacGuffin is a briefcase or a hard drive, something abstractly important because the script says so. Here, the object in question is a Buddha head that villagers literally beg before, cry over, and organize their entire daily life around. When Ting leaves home, he isn't just chasing justice, he's carrying the emotional weight of everyone who donated their meager savings so he could make the trip. The bag of money he takes with him to Bangkok represents an entire village's hope condensed into a handful of crumpled bills. That's why the world of Ong-Bak feels so vivid even before you start cataloging its set pieces. The tuk-tuk chases, the bone-rattling falls, the street markets, the seedy backroom fights, those are all spectacular, and we'll dig deep into them later. But they land so hard because the film has already done the quiet work of showing you what's at stake back home. You've seen the village, you've seen the drought, you've seen people who don't have much clinging to the one sacred thing they believe is protecting them. So when Ting steps into danger, every bruise he takes feels like it's on behalf of that entire community. There's also a subtler layer to this world that's easy to miss if you only focus on the punches. The movie keeps juxtaposing scenes of spiritual devotion, temples, rituals, the calm presence of statues, with images of exploitation, stolen relics, underground auctions, criminals hoarding sacred objects like trophies. That's not an accident. It reflects real anxieties within Thailand about how modernization, urbanization, and global demand for exotic artifacts can twist traditions into commodities. Ong-Bak may be packed with action, but running beneath the fights is a steady pulse of cultural critique. And at the center of all of it stands Ting, this physically unstoppable yet morally conflicted figure. He's not a quip-heavy action hero or a brooding anti-hero. He's a village kid, a temple trainee, someone who looks almost out of place in the city's underworld until he starts moving. That contrast is the key to how this world works. The further he gets from Nong Pradu, the more the film asks a simple but powerful question. Can a body trained in discipline and devotion survive in a place that treats bodies as disposable entertainment? By the time you've watched him crash through tables, dive through impossible gaps, and stand his ground against men twice his size, you realize something important. This isn't just a story about retrieving a stolen statue, it's about a country negotiating what it wants to keep and what it's willing to lose, told through a man whose fists, knees, and elbows are constantly forced to answer that question in real time. Ong-Bak builds a world where faith and violence occupy the same space, where every blow lands in both flesh and metaphor, and where one village's missing Buddha head becomes a lens for looking at Thailand's past, present, and future all at once. And it all begins with that crack of an elbow, that roar of a crowd, and a quiet promise made in a tiny village temple: bring Ong-Bak home. That promise drives the entire first act. But what makes it work dramatically isn't just the vow itself, it's how deliberately the film delays showing you what Ting can actually do. Most action movies would open with a bravura showcase, a breathless introduction to the hero's skills designed to hook you in the first 5 minutes. Ong-Bak takes the opposite approach. It spends its opening stretches establishing restraint. You see Ting practicing forms in the temple, moving with precision and control, never throwing a strike in anger. You see him helping elders, climbing trees to gather herbs, bowing respectfully to monks. The film is patient, almost meditative, showing you a young man whose entire identity is built around discipline and service. Then the theft happened. The sequence where the Buddha head is stolen is brief but loaded with symbolic weight. Criminals slip into the temple at night, sawing through stone with brutal efficiency while the village sleeps. When morning comes and the desecration is discovered, the camera lingers on the reaction shots. Older villagers covering their mouths in horror, children staring in confusion, monks looking utterly lost. There's no dramatic score underlining the moment. The silence does all the work. What's been violated isn't just property, it's the spiritual center of an entire community, and the film trusts you to feel that without over-explaining. The village council meets to decide what to do, and this is where Ting steps forward. He's not the obvious choice. He's young, inexperienced in the world beyond the village, and his Muay Thai training was never meant for combat outside control practice. But he's also the only person with the physical capability to handle what might be waiting in Bangkok. And more importantly, he volunteers out of genuine devotion, not ego or ambition. The elders pool their savings, a modest sum that represents everything they can afford, and entrust it to him. That money becomes a running motif throughout the story, a tangible reminder of the faith being placed in him and the consequences if he fails. Then Ting boards a bus, and the film's entire energy shifts. Bangkok hits like a wall of noise and movement. The editing pace picks up. The color palette changes from the warm, dusty tones of the village to harsher urban lights. Neon signs, crowded markets, chaotic traffic. Ting steps off the bus looking every bit the outsider. Simple clothes, quiet demeanor, a bag clutched carefully against his chest. He's immediately overwhelmed, not just by the scale of the city but by its indifference. Nobody cares that he's on a sacred mission. To Bangkok, he's just another provincial kid with no connections and no street sense. GW. That's when Humlai enters the picture. Humlai is Ting's old childhood friend from the village who moved to the city years ago, ostensibly to study and make something of himself. What Ting doesn't know yet, but the audience learns almost immediately, is that Humlai has become a low-level con artist, drowning in gambling debts and running petty scams with his girlfriend Muay Thai. The contrast is deliberate and sharp. Ting left home carrying his village's hope. Humlai left and got swallowed by everything the city rewards: selfishness, desperation, quick money, broken promises. Their reunion is awkward and layered with unspoken tension. Humlai pretends to be thrilled to see Ting, immediately offering to help track down the stolen Buddha head. But his eyes are already calculating. He sees Ting's bag of money and smells opportunity. Muay Thai, sharp and cynical, picks up on Ting's naivety within minutes. The film doesn't need to spell out what's happening. You can read it in body language, in the way Humlai talks too fast, in the way Muay Thai exchanges knowing glances with him. Ting trusts them because they're connected to home, but that trust is about to be weaponized against him. What follows is a masterclass in escalating betrayal disguised as hospitality. Humlai takes Ting around the city under the guise of investigating leads, but he's really just stalling, trying to figure out how to get his hands on the village's money without outright stealing it. He drags Ting to seedy bars, introduces him to shady contacts, and keeps promising that they're close to finding information. Meanwhile, Ting is visibly uncomfortable. He doesn't drink, doesn't gamble, doesn't understand the transactional nature of every relationship around him. The film uses this dynamic to highlight the clash between rural values and urban survival tactics without ever feeling preachy. You just watch Ting navigate a world where everything he was taught to respect, honesty, loyalty, restraint, gets treated like weakness. Then comes the moment that changes everything, the underground fight challenge. Humlai, desperate to pay off his debts, hears about an illegal fighting ring where a local thug is offering cash prizes to anyone who can beat him. It's brutal, unregulated Muay Thai, the kind of violence Ting was explicitly trained not to participate in. But Humlai sees dollar signs and convinces Ting that if they win the purse, they'll have enough money to bribe informants and track down the thieves faster. It's a lie wrapped in just enough logic to sound plausible, and Ting, isolated and unsure how else to proceed, reluctantly agrees. This is where the film finally unleashes what it's been holding back. The fight itself is staged in a cramped, smoke-filled warehouse with a crowd of gamblers pressing in from all sides. Ting steps into the makeshift ring looking calm, almost detached, but the second the bell rings, or rather, the second someone shouts, "Go!" everything explodes. The choreography is raw and kinetic, shot in medium-wide frames that let you see the full range of motion. Ting's knees driving upward with shocking speed, his elbows cutting through guards, his footwork shifting angles faster than his opponent can process. What makes the sequence so effective isn't just the physicality, though that's stunning, it's the contradiction playing out on screen. Ting was taught that Muay Thai is a discipline rooted in respect, honor, and spiritual practice. Now he's using it in a back-alley betting ring where the only goal is to hurt someone for money. You can see the conflict in his face between strikes. He's not enjoying this, not showboating, not playing to the crowd. He's doing what he has to do, and that tension makes every hit feel heavier than just a stunt. When he finally wins, knocking his opponent out cold with a devastating knee strike, the crowd erupts, but Ting just stands there breathing hard, looking like he's crossed a line he didn't want to cross. Humlai, of course, is ecstatic. He collects the winnings and immediately starts talking about how they can multiply the money, how there are bigger fights with bigger payouts, how Ting's skills are a gold mine. Muay Thai, watching from the sidelines, starts to look at Ting differently. Not with affection exactly, but with a kind of wary respect. She's seen plenty of tough guys in this world, but there's something unsettling about the way Ting fights. No wasted movement, no bravado, just controlled devastation. But Ting doesn't want to fight again. He tries to redirect the conversation back to finding the Buddha head, insisting that the money was meant to fund the search, not to gamble on more matches. Humlai brushes him off with vague reassurances, and that's when the power dynamic between them starts to fracture. Up until now, Humlay has been the guide, the city-smart friend showing the country kid how things work. But in that warehouse, Ting revealed something Humlay can't match: real capability. And once capability enters the equation, Humlay's lies and stalling tactics start to lose their grip. The second fight comes quicker than Ting wants. Humlay, now emboldened and deeper in debt, arranges another match without fully explaining the stakes. This time the opponent is more dangerous, a seasoned underground fighter with a reputation for brutality. The film doesn't glamorize the violence. It's ugly and uncomfortable, shot in harsh lighting that emphasizes sweat, bruises, and the dull thud of limbs colliding. Ting wins again, but not without taking damage. His ribs are sore, his face is cut, and for the first time you see exhaustion creeping into his movements. Moylek pulls him aside afterward and tells him the truth. Humlay has been lying about nearly everything. There's no investigation, no leads. Humlay has been using Ting to win fights and settle his own debts while pretending to search for the stolen statue. It's a quiet, devastating moment. Moylek doesn't deliver the news with malice. She's almost apologetic, like she's tired of watching Humlay drag everyone down with him. Ting's reaction is subdued. No explosive anger, no shouting. He just absorbs the information with a kind of weary disappointment, the look of someone realizing that the person he trusted most in this city was using him from the start. That betrayal crystallizes the stakes moving into Act 2. Ting now understands that he's completely alone in Bangkok, with dwindling resources, a body that's starting to break down, and no real leads on where the Buddha head has gone. Humlay, confronted by Moylek's honesty, tries to justify himself. He needed the money, he was going to help eventually, things just got out of hand. But the damage is done. The friendship that connected Ting to his home village, that gave him an anchor in the city, is now another casualty of urban corruption. But just as Ting is preparing to strike out on his own, a new lead finally surfaces. Through the underground fight network, whispers start circulating about a crime boss named Kumtuan who deals in black market artifacts, including stolen religious relics. The name keeps coming up in conversations, always in hushed tones, always with a note of fear. Kumtuan isn't just a gangster, he's a brutal, well-connected figure who operates with near impunity, protected by money, violence, and political connection. If anyone in Bangkok has the stolen Ong-Bak head, it's him. Ting makes the decision to go after Kumtuan directly, despite having no plan and no backup. It's a reckless choice, born out of desperation and isolation, but it also marks the moment when Ting stops relying on anyone else. He's been betrayed, manipulated, and forced to fight in rings he never wanted to enter. Now he's done asking for help. The village's hope, the elders' savings, the sacred promise, all of it rests on his shoulders alone, and the only tools he has are his fists, his knees, his elbows, and a faith that feels increasingly fragile under Bangkok's weight. The camera holds on his face for a beat, dirt-streaked, bruised, exhausted, but absolutely resolved. He's no longer the quiet temple trainee who stepped off the bus clutching a bag of money and a naive belief that people would help him. Bangkok has stripped away that innocence, leaving behind something harder, sharper, and far more dangerous. When he pushes through the door and into the noise and smoke of the club, you know he's not just walking into another fight. He's walking into a war against an entire system that treats sacred things like commodities and treats people like disposable tools. And the real violence is only just beginning. The Fight Club reeks of sweat, cigarette smoke, and something darker. Desperation turned into spectacle. Ting doesn't announce himself. He doesn't need to. The moment he steps into the main room, conversations stutter and heads turn, because word has already spread through Bangkok's underground about the village fighter who moves like lightning and hits like a sledgehammer. The crowd parts slightly, not out of respect but out of curiosity, the way people clear space around something unpredictable and possibly dangerous. Ting scans the room methodically, looking for anyone who might lead him to Kumtuan. And that's when the first challenge comes. A local enforcer, massive and scarred, steps forward and blocks his path. No words are exchanged. In places like this, intent gets communicated through stance and eye contact, and the message is clear. You don't walk into Kumtuan's territory asking questions without proving you belong. The enforcer cracks his knuckles, the crowd tightens into a rough circle, and Ting exhales slowly, centering himself the way his temple teacher showed him. Then the enforcer lunges, and the room explodes into motion. What follows is less a fight than a demonstration of the gap between size and skill. The enforcer relies on power-wide haymakers, crushing grapples, the kind of brute force tactics that work on most opponents. Ting dismantles him with surgical precision. A quick sidestep to avoid the first punch, a sharp elbow to the ribs that cracks loud enough to make spectators wince, a sweeping leg that drops the bigger man to one knee, and finally a knee strike delivered with such controlled violence that the enforcer crumples backward and doesn't get up. The entire sequence lasts maybe 20 seconds. The crowd goes from jeering to dead silent in the span of 3 strikes. A door at the back of the room opens, and a sharply dressed lieutenant gestures for Ting to follow. He's led through a narrow hallway lined with faded photographs of past fighters, some victorious, some clearly beaten to ruin, and into a private room where Kam Tuan's operation reveals itself in layers. Maps on the walls marking shipment routes, crates stacked in corners, some open to show religious statues, ancient pottery, ceremonial masks. This isn't just a fight club. It's the nerve center of an artifact smuggling ring that treats Thailand's cultural heritage like inventory, sacred objects reduced to line items on a ledger. Ting's jaw tightens as he recognizes symbols and styles from temples he knows, pieces that were never meant to leave their shrines. But the Buddha head from Ong-Bak isn't here. The lieutenant, coldly professional, explains that items move through this location quickly, photographed, authenticated, then shipped to buyers in other countries before authorities can trace them. If Ting wants to know where a specific piece went, he'll need to talk to Kam Tuan directly. And Kam Tuan doesn't grant audiences to village nobodies unless they're worth his time. The implication hangs in the air: fight in the main event tonight, win, and maybe you get 5 minutes with the boss. Ting agrees without hesitation, because what choice does he have? The main event turns out to be an elimination gauntlet. 4 fighters, no breaks, victory only if you're the last one standing. The other 3 competitors are veterans of this circuit, men who've spent years turning their bodies into weapons for profit, who know every dirty trick and illegal technique that referees and sanctioned matches would never allow. They study Ting during the pre-fight instructions, sizing him up, and you can see them dismiss him as too small, too clean, too obviously out of his depth. They realize their mistake within the first 30 seconds. The bell rings, and one fighter immediately rushes Ting with a flying knee, trying to end things fast. Ting shifts his weight, catches the incoming leg mid-air, and sweeps the man's standing foot out from under him in a move so fluid it looks rehearsed. Before the first attacker even hits the ground, Ting pivots to meet the second, who's coming in low for a grapple. Ting's elbow crashes down onto the man's shoulder blade, a precise, targeted strike that kills the grappling attempt instantly and leaves the fighter gasping in pain. Now the remaining 2 come at him together, flanking from opposite sides. This is where the choreography transcends simple fight mechanics and becomes something closer to problem-solving in real time. Ting can't block both directions at once, so he doesn't try. Instead, he moves between them, using their aggression against each other. He ducks under a roundhouse kick, letting it sail past him and nearly connect with the other fighter. He parries a punch into empty air, then counters with a spinning back elbow that connects so hard the recipient's mouthguard flies out and lands in the crowd. The fighters are tough and experienced, but Ting is operating on a different level entirely, not because he's stronger, but because his technique is built on principles they've never had to master. Every movement has economy, every strike has intent. There's no showboating, no wasted energy, just ruthless efficiency. By the time it's over, all 3 opponents are down, and Ting is barely breathing hard. The crowd's reaction is complicated, half awe, half fear, because what they just witnessed wasn't a brawl. It was something more unsettling, traditional martial arts executed at such a high level that it looked almost supernatural. Ting doesn't celebrate. He just turns to the lieutenant and waits, silently demanding the promised meeting. The lieutenant nods slowly, making a quick phone call, and within minutes, Ting is escorted to a car waiting outside. They drive deeper into Bangkok's industrial outskirts, away from the neon and noise. The car pulls up to a warehouse compound surrounded by high fences and security cameras. Inside, the space has been converted into something between a penthouse and a fortress. Expensive furniture surrounded by armed guards, artwork stolen from temples displayed like trophies on the walls. And there, seated at a low table sipping tea with eerie calm, is Kam Tuan himself. He's older than Ting expected, dressed in traditional silk, speaking in a soft voice that somehow makes him more menacing than if he were shouting. Kam Tuan greets Ting almost politely, complimenting his fighting skills and asking casual questions about his training background. Then, with the same pleasant tone, he asks what Ting wants. When Ting explains about the stolen Buddha head from Nong Pradu, Kam Tuan's expression doesn't change. He simply confirms that yes, he handled that piece, and yes, it's already been sold to a private collector who paid very well for authentic sacred art. The transaction is complete. The head is gone. Ting asks quietly, respectfully, for the buyer's name. Kam Tuan laughs, not mockingly, but with genuine amusement, as if Ting just told a charming joke. He explains that discretion is the foundation of his business, that revealing clients would end his operation overnight, and that no amount of fighting prowess will change basic economics. Then his tone shifts, turning almost paternal. He tells Ting to go home, forget about the statue, tell his village it was destroyed or lost. He even offers money enough to replace what Ting spent getting to Bangkok, plus extra for his trouble. It's a generous offer delivered with absolute finality. Ting refuses. The room's temperature drops. Guards tense, hands moving closer to weapons. Kamtuan sets down his teacup with a soft clink and regards Ting with new interest. He asks why a smart young man with extraordinary talent would risk his life over a piece of stone. Ting's answer is simple and devastating because he made a promise to people who have nothing else, because that piece of stone is everything to them. Because walking away would mean becoming exactly the kind of person Bangkok turns village kids into, someone who forgets where he came from and what actually matters. For a moment, Kamtuan almost looks impressed. Then he nods to his guards. What happens next is the film's most brutal sequence yet, not because of spectacle, but because of sheer numbers. 6 guards converge on Ting simultaneously in a tight space where he can't maneuver freely. They're professionals, coordinated, using batons and weighted gloves designed to incapacitate without killing. Ting fights like a cornered animal, landing devastating strikes even as he takes hits to the ribs, back, and head. He drops 2 guards with rapid-fire elbows, kicks a third through a glass table, but there are too many, and they're too prepared. They beat him into semi-consciousness, then drag him outside and dump him in an alley like garbage. When Ting wakes hours later, it's raining, and his entire body is a map of pain. Ribs almost certainly cracked. Left eye swollen shut, knuckles torn and bleeding. He lies there in the dark, rain mixing with blood, and for the first time since leaving the village, he looks genuinely broken. Not just physically, but spiritually. He's fought his way through Bangkok's underworld, endured betrayal and violence, and he's no closer to recovering the Buddha head than when he started. The city has chewed him up and spat him out, just like it does to everyone who arrives with hope and leaves with nothing. But then Muay finds him. She's been tracking his movements through the fight circuit, partly out of guilt for Humlai's betrayal, partly out of something approaching respect for Ting's stubborn refusal to quit. She helps him to a cheap room, patches his wounds with supplies from a corner pharmacy, and tells him what she's learned. Kamtuan was telling the truth about selling the Buddha head, but he lied about it being gone for good. The buyer is Don, a reclusive crime lord who collects sacred artifacts for a private museum in his compound. The head is still in Thailand, still within reach. If Ting can survive getting into Don's fortress and taking it back. Ting, battered and exhausted, asks why she's helping him. Muay doesn't have a clean answer. Maybe because Humlai's cowardice disgusts her. Maybe because watching someone actually fight for something real, instead of just scamming for survival, reminds her of the person she used to be before Bangkok hollowed her out. She doesn't say any of that explicitly, she just shrugs and tells him that if he's going after Don, he's going to need backup, information, and a plan, none of which he currently has. That's when Humlai reappears, looking sheepish and desperate. He's heard about Ting's beating and knows that going after Don is near suicidal without inside knowledge. Despite everything, despite the lies and betrayal, Humlai offers to help, not out of redemption exactly, but because he's starting to understand that Ting's mission is the only genuine thing happening in a city built on cons and exploitation. It's a fragile alliance, nobody fully trusts anyone, but necessity forces them into an uneasy partnership. Together, they start planning the infiltration. Don's compound is in the outskirts, heavily guarded, accessible only by a few routes that are constantly monitored. Muay knows someone who used to work security there. Humlai knows someone who supplies food to the compound's kitchen. They piece together a rough blueprint, guard rotations, entry points, where the private museum is likely located. It's not a good plan, but it's the only plan they have. Before they move, Ting does something unexpected. He visits a temple. It's a small, quiet shrine tucked between apartment buildings. Nothing grand, but it's the first moment of genuine peace since he arrived in Bangkok. He kneels before a Buddha statue, not Ong-Bak, but similar enough to remind him why he's here, and prays. Not for victory, not for strength, but for clarity, for the ability to finish what he started without losing himself completely in the process. The scene is brief, maybe 2 minutes, but it recalibrates the entire emotional trajectory. This isn't a revenge story or a power fantasy. It's about a man trying to hold on to his values while surrounded by a system designed to destroy them. The next night, they make their move. The approach is tense and quiet, scaling a back wall, slipping past patrol routes, moving through shadows while security cameras sweep overhead. For a while, it works. They get inside the compound, navigate through storage areas, locate the museum wing. Then an alarm trips. Humlai knocks over a vase, a guard notices a door that should be locked, and suddenly the whole place lights up with sirens and shouting. Ting tells Muay and Humlai to run while he creates a distraction. What follows is the film's centerpiece action sequence, the legendary tuk-tuk chase through Bangkok streets. Ting commandeers a tuk-tuk, a three-wheeled motorized rickshaw never designed for high-speed pursuit, and tears through narrow alleys with Don's men chasing in cars and motorcycles. The stunt work is insane, the tuk-tuk weaving between market stalls, launching off ramps created by uneven pavement, tilting on two wheels around impossible corners. Ting drives with one hand while fighting off attackers with the other, throwing elbows at motorcyclists who pull alongside, kicking at windshields, using the tuk-tuk itself as a weapon by ramming it into pursuing vehicle. The sequence is shot with minimal cuts, letting you feel every bounce, every near miss, every moment of genuine peril. At one point, Ting drives straight through a construction site, the tuk-tuk airborne for a stomach, dropping second before crashing back down onto the street. At another, he spins the vehicle in a full 360-degree turn to disorient pursuers, then accelerates backward through a fruit market, produce exploding against the windshield. It's excessive and thrilling and completely absurd, but it's grounded by the fact that you can see it's actually happening. Real vehicles, real stunts, real danger. Eventually, the tuk-tuk gives out, engine smoking, and Ting has to abandon it and run. He ducks into a building under construction, multiple floors of exposed concrete and rebar, and that's where the chase transforms into close-quarters combat. Don's men flood in from multiple entrances, and Ting fights floor by floor, using the environment brutally, slamming heads into metal beams, kicking opponents off ledges, grabbing loose tools and pipes as improvised weapons. The cinematography stays wide and grounded, letting you track the geography of the fight, making every fall and collision feel consequential. On the top floor, cornered and running out of options, Ting does the unthinkable. He jumps. It's a 15-foot drop onto a pile of sandbags below, and he lands hard, rolls, and keeps running despite the impact that should have shattered his ankles. The pursuing guards stare down from above, unwilling to follow, and Ting disappears into the Bangkok night, limping but free. The chase is over. He didn't get the Buddha head this time, but he got something else, proof that he can survive Don's resources, that he can't be stopped by money or numbers alone. Back at the safe house, Muay and Humle are waiting, astonished that he made it out alive. They didn't retrieve the artifact, but the failed infiltration revealed something crucial. Don keeps his most valuable pieces in a vault that's only open during private showings for potential buyers. If they can get Ting inside as a buyer's bodyguard or hired muscle, he might have one more chance to reach the Buddha head. It's a desperate gamble, but desperation is all they have left. Ting spends those 3 days recovering, training despite his injuries, preparing mentally for what might be a one-way mission. Muay forges credentials. Humle bribes a contact to add Ting's name to a security roster. Everything has to go perfectly, which means it almost certainly won't. But as Ting wraps his hands before the operation, there's a quiet resolve in his face that wasn't there before. Bangkok has beaten him, betrayed him, nearly killed him, and still he's going back, because some promises can't be broken, no matter what the cost. The credentials get them through the first checkpoint, but barely. A guard examines Ting's forged security badge with suspicious eyes, comparing the photo to his bruised face, clearly wondering why someone who looks like they just lost a street fight is supposedly working elite private security. Ting keeps his expression neutral, his posture military straight, and after a tense 10 seconds, the guard waves him through with a grunt. He's inside Don's compound again, but this time the approach is different. No shadows, no sneaking, just walking through the front entrance in a borrowed suit that doesn't quite fit, pretending to belong. The private showing is exactly as grotesque as Ting imagined. Wealthy collectors from across Asia mill around a gilded gallery space, sipping champagne while examining stolen artifacts displayed under museum-quality lighting. Sacred masks torn from ceremony halls, ancient manuscripts that should be in temples, bronze deity statues priced like commodities. The collectors discuss provenance and authenticity with the casual detachment of people buying furniture, pointing at objects that represent centuries of devotion as if they're just interesting conversation pieces. Ting moves along the perimeter, playing his role as hired security, but his hands clench involuntarily every time someone touches a sacred object with bare fingers or laughs while standing too close to something holy. Then he sees it. The Ong-Bak Buddha head sits on a raised platform in the center of the main gallery, spotlit like the crown jewel of the collection. Even severed from its body and surrounded by greed, it radiates a kind of quiet dignity, the stone face serene, unmoved by its captivity. Ting's breath catches. After everything, the betrayals, the beatings, the endless fighting, the object of his entire mission is right there, 15 feet away, protected only by velvet ropes and the assumption that nobody would be crazy enough to steal it in a room full of armed guards. Ting is absolutely that crazy. He waits for the exact moment when a buyer asks a detailed question, drawing Don and several guards to the far side of the gallery to discuss shipping logistics. Then he moves. Not running, not drawing attention, just walking with purpose toward the platform like he's been instructed to inspect something. His hand closes around the Buddha head, heavier than expected, stone-worn smooth by generations of reverent touch, and he lifts it from its display mount in one fluid motion. For a heartbeat, nobody notices. Then the alarms scream, and the entire compound erupts into chaos. Ting doesn't try to hide. He turns and sprints for the exit, cradling the Buddha head against his chest like a rescued child, while guards converge from every direction. He crashes through a serving door into the kitchen, sending waitstaff scattering, then vaults over a prep counter and kicks through a back exit into the compound's exterior courtyard. Behind him, radio chatter explodes as Don's entire security apparatus mobilizes. Ahead of him, high walls and locked gates. Beside him, absolutely no plan for how to actually escape with a 50-pound stone artifact while being chased by 24 armed men. So he fights. The courtyard becomes a war zone. Guards pour through multiple entrances, and Ting sets the Buddha head down carefully, even in the middle of combat. He refuses to use it as a weapon or let it be damaged. Then meets the first wave head-on. The choreography here is different from earlier fights. Ting isn't trying to win, he's trying to create space and buy time. He targets knees and shins to drop attackers fast, uses sweeping kicks to knock groups off balance, delivers rapid-fire elbow strikes that force guards to fall back and regroup. A guard with a baton rushes him from the left. Ting sidesteps, catches the weapon mid-swing, and uses the guard's own momentum to flip him over his shoulder into 2 other attackers approaching from behind. Another guard tries a tackle from the right. Ting drives his knee upward into the man's chest so hard you can hear the air explode from his lungs. Within 30 seconds there are 5 guards on the ground, but 15 more are closing in, and Ting's breathing is already ragged from exhaustion and previous injuries. That's when Humle crashes a stolen delivery truck through the compound's side gate. The truck smashes through wrought iron with a sound like a bomb going off, scattering guards and debris in every direction. Moylek leans out the passenger window screaming for Ting to run, and he grabs the Buddha head and sprints toward the vehicle while the temporarily stunned security forces scramble to react. He throws the statue through the truck's open back doors, then dives in after it just as Humle slams the accelerator and they tear back through the destroyed gate into Bangkok streets. The pursuit is immediate and relentless. Multiple SUVs barrel after them, Don's voice undoubtedly crackling through radios ordering his men to retrieve the artifact at any cost. Humle drives with manic desperation, clipping parked cars, running red lights, forcing the truck through gaps that seem physically impossible. Moylek is navigating, shouting directions based on which routes might shake their pursuers. Ting braces himself in the truck bed, holding the Buddha head steady with one hand while watching their hunters close the distance. One of the SUVs pulls alongside, and a guard leans out with a gun. Before he can fire, Ting kicks the truck's back door open and launches himself through the gap, crossing the space between vehicles in a horizontal leap that should be impossible. He crashes through the SUV's window, lands inside in a tangle of broken glass, and immediately starts fighting 3 guards in the confined interior while both vehicles are still moving at 60 miles per hour. It's claustrophobic and brutal. Elbows slamming into faces in tight quarters, knees driving into ribs, no room for footwork or technique. Just violent problem-solving while metal and asphalt blur past the window. Ting drives his elbow into the driver's temple, and the SUV swerves wildly. He throws himself out of the vehicle just before it crashes into a parked cement mixer, rolling across pavement before sprinting back to the still-moving truck and hauling himself into the bed with pure upper-body strength. The remaining pursuit vehicles are still coming, but the crash has slowed them down, giving Humle just enough lead to make a sharp turn into a crowded market district where the larger SUVs can't follow as easily. They abandon the truck in a dense residential area and go on foot. Ting carries the Buddha head wrapped in Moylek's jacket, moving through alleys and side streets while police sirens wail in the distance. Don's men are searching too, fanning out through neighborhoods, checking bus stations and train terminals. For 3 hours they hide, moving from one temporary shelter to another, an abandoned building, a sympathetic street vendor's storeroom, a temple courtyard where monks ask no question. Finally, near dawn, they reach a contact. Moylek knows who runs a black market transport service. For the last of their money and some improvised negotiation, the driver agrees to smuggle them out of Bangkok in a produce truck heading northeast, exactly the direction of Nong Pradu. It's cramped and uncomfortable, all 3 of them pressed between crates of vegetables with the Buddha head nestled in padding they've cobbled together from rice sacks. As the truck rumbles out of the city, Ting finally allows himself to relax fractionally, though his body immediately reminds him of every injury he sustained, ribs screaming with each breath, knuckles swollen and torn, a deep exhaustion that goes beyond physical tiredness into something closer to spiritual depletion. Moylek looks at him in the dim light and asks if it was worth it. Ting doesn't answer immediately. He's thinking about everything that brought him here. The village's trust, Humlai's betrayal and partial redemption, the violence he swore never to use, the people he hurt, and the people who hurt him. Finally, he touches the Buddha head gently and says yes, but the word carries more weight than certainty. It has to have been worth it, because if it wasn't, then everything he suffered and compromised would mean nothing. The journey back takes a full day, and when they finally reach Ban Nong Pradu, it's evening. Ting climbs out of the truck stiff and battered, cradling the Buddha head in both arms and starts walking the dusty road toward the village temple. Word spreads faster than he can walk. People emerge from houses, elders first, then families, then children, forming a growing procession behind him. Nobody speaks. They just follow, the silence heavy with emotion that nobody knows how to name. Relief, gratitude, something close to awe that this skinny village kid actually did what seemed impossible. The temple monks are waiting at the entrance. When Ting presents the Buddha head, kneeling to place it before them with hands trembling from exhaustion, the head monk's eyes fill with tears. He places both hands on Ting's shoulders, speaking a blessing in a voice thick with emotion. The other villagers crowd closer, touching Ting's arms, his back, offering water and food and thanks they can't adequately express. Someone brings the Ong-Bak statue's body, and monks begin the careful process of examining how to restore the head to its rightful place. Humlai and Moylek watch from the edge of the gathering, outsiders to this reunion. Ting catches their eyes and gestures for them to come closer, but Humlai shakes his head. This isn't their moment. They helped, yes, but they also betrayed and used him, and that debt doesn't vanish just because the mission succeeded. Moylek mouths something that might be good luck or goodbye, and then they're walking back toward the road, back toward Bangkok, back toward the lives they chose. Ting watches them go with complicated feelings he doesn't try to untangle. Some relationships can't be repaired, only acknowledged. The restoration ceremony happens 3 days later. The entire village gathers to witness monks reattach the Buddha head using traditional methods and sacred rituals. Incense burns, prayers are chanted, and when the head finally settles back onto the statue's shoulders, whole again, restored, there's a collective exhalation of relief so profound it feels physical. Ting participates in the ceremony, but he's quiet, almost withdrawn. He's completed his promise, but the cost is written into his body and across his face. The village sees a hero. He feels like someone who broke every vow he was taught to uphold. After the ceremony, the head monk asks to speak with him privately. They sit in the temple's meditation room, and Ting confesses everything. The fights he participated in, the violence he used, the techniques he turned into weapons for money and survival. He expects judgment, maybe punishment, certainly disappointment. Instead, the monk listens in silence, then asks a simple question: did you fight to harm, or did you fight to protect? Ting thinks about it honestly. Every strike he threw in Bangkok was either in self-defense or in service of retrieving something sacred. He never attacked first. He never fought for pride or pleasure. He fought because the alternative was abandoning his promise. The monk nods slowly and explains that Muay Thai was born from this exact tension. It's a martial art, yes, but also a spiritual practice precisely because it exists in the space between violence and discipline, between harming and protecting. The fact that Ting struggled with that contradiction, that he felt the weight of every compromise, means he hasn't lost himself. The opposite, actually. He's understood at a deeper level what it means to hold on to values in a world designed to destroy them. The guilt he carries is proof that his spirit remains intact. It's not absolution exactly, but it's permission to forgive himself. And that might be more important. The village throws a celebration that night, modest but joyful, with music and food and the kind of communal relief that comes from surviving a crisis together. Ting participates, but part of him remains separate, watching from a slight distance. He's not the same person who left weeks ago. That version was naive, untested, certain about clear lines between right and wrong. The version who came back knows that the world is messier, that sometimes you have to break small promises to keep larger ones. That purity is a luxury not everyone can afford. But he also knows he'd do it again. Someone asks if he'll stay in the village or return to Bangkok. Ting hasn't decided, and the film doesn't force an answer. Maybe he'll stay and teach Muay Thai to the next generation, passing on the discipline as it was passed to him. Maybe he'll leave again, carrying the lessons he learned into new challenges. The film ends not with certainty but with possibility. Ting standing before the restored Ong-Bak statue, the Buddha's face once again watching over the village in serene silence, whole and present, and exactly where it belongs. The final shot holds on the statue, then slowly pulls back to include Ting, then the temple, then the village, then the fields stretching toward the horizon. The camera doesn't linger on his face, doesn't provide a neat emotional summary. It just shows the world continuing, children playing, elders talking, daily life resuming its rhythms around the sacred center that almost was lost but wasn't. And somewhere in Bangkok, in the underworld that never sleeps, fights are still happening, artifacts are still being stolen, sacred objects are still being traded like commodities. But in one small village, in one quiet temple, a promise was kept, and maybe that's enough. Tony Jaa doesn't act with his face as much as he acts with his entire skeletal system. Watch him in the early village scenes, before Bangkok, before the violence. There's a specific quality to how he moves through space that most actors never achieve. His shoulders stay relaxed but ready. His steps are placed with deliberate care, not performatively cautious but genuinely mindful, like someone who's been taught that every movement carries intention. When he bows to the monks, it's not a gesture for the camera. His spine curves with the kind of muscle memory that comes from years of actual practice, not a 2-week acting workshop. This matters because Ting's entire character is built on the foundation of discipline made flesh, and Jaa communicates that before he speaks a single line of dialogue. The genius of his performance is in what he doesn't do. In a genre that often rewards charisma and verbal wit, Jaa plays Ting as borderline taciturn. He's not stoic in the tough guy action hero sense. He's quiet in the way of someone who was raised to listen before speaking, to think before acting, to respect silence as a form of communication. When the village elders debate sending someone to Bangkok, Ting doesn't volunteer with a rousing speech. He simply stands, waits for acknowledgement, and says he'll go 3 words where another actor might demand 3 minutes. The restraint creates a pressure that builds throughout the film. You know this person is capable of explosive violence, but he's containing it behind layers of training and spiritual commitment. What makes Ting compelling as a protagonist is that he's not naturally suited for the story he's trapped in. He's not a reluctant hero in the cliché sense. He volunteers freely, without hesitation. But he's reluctant about the methods his journey demands. Every fight is a compromise. Every act of violence is a small betrayal of the principles he was raised with. Jaa plays this internal conflict, not through anguished monologues, but through micro-expressions between strikes. A tightening around his eyes after a particularly brutal elbow, a moment of hesitation before engaging multiple opponents. The way he immediately steps back and composes himself after winning fights, as if reasserting control over something that threatens to spiral away from him. The film is smart enough to make his physical skills both an asset and a liability. Yes, Ting's Muay Thai expertise lets him survive Bangkok's underworld, but it also makes him a target, a commodity that people like Humle want to exploit, and figures like Kamtuan want to either control or destroy. His body becomes the site of constant negotiation between discipline and survival, between spiritual practice and practical violence, between being a weapon and being a person. Jaa's performance captures this by treating fight sequences not as showcases, but as moral crossroads. Watch his face during the underground elimination gauntlet. There's no triumph in his expression when he wins, only a kind of grim acknowledgement that he's done what was necessary and hates that it was necessary. The physicality itself tells a character story that dialogue never could. Early in the film, Ting's movements are clean and controlled, every technique executed with textbook precision. By the third act, after multiple beatings and escalating stakes, his form gets slightly messier. Strikes still devastatingly effective, but delivered with more urgency, less ceremony. It's a subtle degradation that mirrors his spiritual state, the pristine discipline from the temple getting worn down by Bangkok's brutality. Jaa commits to this progression physically, letting exhaustion show in his shoulders, letting injuries affect his mobility, refusing the superhero convention where damage resets between scenes. Then there's the way he handles the Buddha head itself, which becomes a character beat in miniature. Every time Ting touches it, his entire body language shifts. In the middle of the climactic compound escape, surrounded by chaos and violence, he sets it down gently before engaging guards. When carrying it through the market chase, he cradles it against his chest even though it compromises his ability to defend himself. After recovering it, he won't let anyone else hold it, even allies, not out of possessiveness but out of sacred responsibility. These aren't scripted moments of obvious symbolism. They're choices that reveal how Ting categorizes the world. Some things are holy, and treating them as such matters even when everything else is falling apart. But Ting doesn't exist in isolation, and the film's character work gets interesting in how it uses supporting figures as mirrors and inversions. Humle is the most obvious counterpoint. Same village origin, similar age, divergent paths. Where Ting left home carrying the village's hope, Humle left and got swallowed by the city's capacity to corrupt good intentions. He's not a villain exactly, More like a cautionary tale in human form, someone who started with reasonable ambitions and got ground down by Bangkok's relentless demand that everyone hustle or starve. The actor playing him, Pechtai Wongkamlao, credited as Mum Jokmok, brings a nervous energy that makes Humlai simultaneously sympathetic and infuriating. He talks too fast, his eyes always darting toward exits or opportunities, his body language screaming desperation even when he's trying to project confidence. The relationship between Ting and Humlai is the film's emotional core in ways that aren't immediately obvious. They share history and affection, which makes the betrayal sting harder than if Humlai were a stranger. But there's also a deep sadness in how Humlai looks at Ting. Not just guilt, but something closer to grief for the person he used to be before the city changed him. In their early scenes together, Humlai keeps trying to impress Ting with his success in Bangkok, showing off connections and street knowledge, but you could see he knows it's hollow. He's become exactly the kind of person his village self would have despised, and Ting's presence is a walking reminder of that transformation. What saves Humlai from being a simple cautionary tale is his incomplete redemption. He doesn't have a clean arc where he sees the error of his ways and becomes heroic. Even when he helps with the final infiltration, his motivations are mixed genuine affection for Ting, sure, but also desperation to prove he's not completely lost, plus the practical calculation that aligning with Ting is probably safer than staying in Bangkok with debts and enemies multiplying. The performance captures this ambiguity beautifully. You never quite trust him, even when he's being helpful, because his survival instincts are always operating in parallel with whatever loyalty he feels. Moylek operates as a different kind of mirror cynicism versus innocence. Where Ting believes in sacred responsibility and keeping promises, Moylek has learned that Bangkok rewards neither. She's sharp and practical, the kind of person who sizes up every situation for angles and exits, who treats trust as a currency you spend carefully because you can't afford to waste it. The actress, Pumwari Yodkamal, plays her with a hardness that occasionally cracks to reveal someone who's not as detached as she pretends to be. Watch her face when she patches Ting's wounds after his beating. She's doing it with brisk efficiency, no nonsense, but there's a tenderness in how she handles the worst injuries that contradicts her tough person persona. Her character raises an interesting question. Is she helping Ting because he reminds her of who she used to be, or because he represents something she knows is already dead? The film never answers definitively, which is perfect. Moylek's assistance comes with clear-eyed pragmatism. She knows helping Ting is probably futile, that one village kid isn't going to change Bangkok's fundamental corruption, that getting the Buddha head back won't solve the larger problem of sacred things being commodified. But she helps anyway, maybe because futile gestures are the only form of resistance available to people trapped in systems they can't escape. Her character embodies a kind of defeated idealism. She still recognizes what's worth fighting for, even if she no longer believes fighting will change anything. The dynamic between the three of them, Ting, Humlai, Moylek, creates a fascinating triangle of moral position. Ting represents unspoiled principle being tested. Humlai represents principle compromised and desperately seeking redemption. Moylek represents principle acknowledged but abandoned out of survival necessity. None of them is positioned as definitively right. The film doesn't condemn Humlai and Moylek for adapting to Bangkok's brutality, and it doesn't naively celebrate Ting's rigid adherence to values that the city constantly punishes. Instead, it watches them negotiate between these positions, sometimes failing, sometimes succeeding, always constrained by circumstances larger than individual choice. On the antagonist side, the film takes a more archetypal approach, but not a shallow one. Kam Tuan and Don aren't given detailed backstories or humanizing moments, but they're not cartoons either. They represent systems more than individuals, specifically the apparatus that extracts value from culture and spirituality without recognizing either as anything beyond inventory. Kam Tuan's soft-spoken menace is particularly effective because it highlights the banality of cultural exploitation. He's not a ranting supervillain, he's a businessman who happens to trade in stolen sacred objects the same way others might trade in electronics or textiles. His calm professionalism makes him more unsettling than theatrical evil ever could. Don functions similarly, less a character than an embodiment of wealth's capacity to insulate itself from consequences. His fortress, his guards, his private museum of stolen artifacts, these aren't just obstacles for Ting to overcome. They're physical manifestations of how money creates barriers that turn sacred objects into luxury goods and turn violence into a service you can purchase. The film doesn't need to give Don a complex personality because his function is already clear. He's the end point of the commodity chain that starts with theft and ends with private collections where spirituality is reduced to aesthetic value. But the film's most interesting character choice might be treating the village itself as a collective protagonist. Ban Non Pradu isn't just a setting, it's a living presence in the narrative, given weight through careful attention to community dynamics. The elders who debate sending Ting aren't interchangeable background figures. Each has distinct concerns, different levels of hope or despair about recovering the Buddha head. The villagers who pool their money aren't just plot devices. The film shows their hands trembling as they contribute, shows their faces tight with worry about whether they can afford to give what little they have. These choices transform the village from backdrop into character, and they raise the stakes of Ting's mission beyond personal honor into communal survival. This is where Jaa's performance gains additional resonance. He's not fighting for himself. Every strike he throws, every injury he endures, carries the weight of those villagers' hopes and savings and desperate faith that sacred things could be protected. The film periodically cuts back to the village during Ting's Bangkok ordeal, not to advance plot, but to remind us what's at stake. We see the damaged Ong-Bak statue with its missing head, the temple looking incomplete, villagers going about their lives with a palpable absence hanging over everything. These moments are quiet and brief, but they recalibrate the entire emotional register of the action sequence. The character work also extends to how the film handles violence as character expression. Each fighter Ting faces has a distinct style that reveals personality. The underground enforcers rely on size and intimidation, fighting like people who've learned that most opponents fold under pressure. The elimination gauntlet fighters use dirty tricks and opportunism, reflecting their background in unregulated survival of the fittest circuits. Kamtuan's guards are coordinated and professional, trained soldiers doing a job. These distinctions matter because they show Ting constantly having to adapt, reading opponents not just physically but psychologically, understanding what kind of violence he's facing and responding accordingly. And Ting's own fighting style is inseparable from his character. He doesn't waste movement. He doesn't grandstand. He ends fights as quickly as possible, not to show off efficiency, but because prolonging violence feels spiritually corrosive to him. There's an almost apologetic quality to some of his finishing strikes, as if he's sorry this is necessary, but absolutely committed to seeing it through. Jaa makes these choices visible in subtle ways. The exhale before engaging, the immediate centering ritual after a knockout, the way he never celebrates victory beyond simple acknowledgement. The film also does something unusual with physical vulnerability. Action cinema typically treats the hero's body as essentially indestructible. Injuries are cosmetic, damage resets between scenes, recovery happens instantaneously. Ong-Bak accumulates damage across Ting's body and face, showing exhaustion and pain compounding. By the third act, Jaa is moving differently, compensating for injuries, favoring his less damaged side. It's a choice that grounds the fantastical action in bodily consequences, reminding us that Ting is human despite his superhuman capabilities. The vulnerability makes him more heroic, not less. He keeps fighting despite the damage, which requires a different kind of courage than invulnerability ever could. There's also a wordless scene that captures everything about Ting's character in 90 seconds. After the beating outside Kamtuan's compound, when Ting is lying broken in the rain, the camera holds on his face for an extended beat. He's not unconscious, just lying there, staring at nothing, rain mixing with blood. For a moment you see something close to defeat, not physical defeat, but spiritual exhaustion, the weight of realizing how far he is from home and how little his training prepared him for this kind of corruption. Then, slowly, his hand closes into a fist. He pushes himself upright. The defeat doesn't vanish, but determination overrides it. Jaa plays the entire sequence without dialogue, communicating a complete emotional journey through minute physical changes, the slackness of despair tightening into resolve. That's the essence of the performance and the character. Ting is someone who keeps getting back up, not because he's invincible, but because the alternative is unthinkable. He made a promise. People are depending on him. The Buddha head needs to come home. These facts don't care about his injuries or exhaustion or moral conflicts, so he rises again and again, because what else can he do? It's a kind of heroism that feels more real than the quipping invulnerability of most action protagonists. Less about being exceptional, more about refusing to quit even when quitting is the obviously rational choice. The supporting cast understands this and performs accordingly. Humle's nervous energy makes sense as the natural response of someone who would quit, who has quit on his principles, watching someone who won't. Moylek's hardness makes sense as armor against caring too much about people like Ting, who are doomed by their own integrity. Even the antagonist's calm professionalism makes sense as the attitude of people who've never encountered someone willing to sacrifice this much for something so impractical as a village's sacred object. Everyone's character choices orbit around the central question Ting embodies: what are you willing to endure for something that matters? And because the film commits to this character foundation, the action sequences become more than spectacle. They're arguments. Ting's body is making a case that some things are worth protecting even when the cost is brutal, that discipline and tradition aren't weaknesses, that spiritual values can survive in hostile environments if someone is willing to bleed for them. Every opponent he faces represents a counter-argument. That power is what matters, that sacred things are just objects, that adaptability and ruthlessness beat principle. The fights are these arguments played out in bone and muscle, and Ting wins not because good always triumphs, but because his technique, rooted in centuries of refinement, is simply better than their opportunistic violence. That's what elevates Ong-Bak beyond typical martial arts character work. Ting isn't learning to believe in himself or discovering hidden strength or conquering his fears, the usual character arc. Instead, he's navigating the impossible tension between who he is and what the world demands he become. He doesn't resolve that tension through some transformative realization. He just endures it, holds on to himself as tightly as he can, and accepts that keeping his promise means carrying guilt and compromise as permanent scars. Tony Jaa makes you believe every second of that journey, not through conventional acting, but through the complete commitment of his physical being to the role. His body becomes the text we read, every scar and bruise a sentence, every movement a paragraph about discipline under siege. When he finally returns the Buddha head to the village, battered and transformed, the character who kneels before the monks isn't the same person who left, but he kept the promise. And in the world Ong-Bak builds, that's everything. There's a moment early in the underground fight sequences where the film does something audacious. It shows you the same bone-cracking elbow strike 3 times in a row from different angles. Not a flashback, not a slow-motion artistic flourish. Just the same devastating hit. Ting's elbow connecting with an opponent's jaw played out in rapid succession from 3 camera positions, each replay emphasizing a different element: the speed, the impact, the physical consequence. It's a technique that should feel gimmicky or repetitive, but instead it works like an exclamation point, the film itself unable to contain its excitement about what you just witnessed and demanding you appreciate it from multiple perspectives. That replay technique becomes a signature throughout Ong-Bak, and it reveals something essential about the film's entire technical philosophy: transparency. Most action cinema in 2003 was moving toward concealment. Rapid cuts to hide wirework, CGI enhancement to make impossible movements seem real, digital trickery to protect actors from actual danger. Ong-Bak sprints in the opposite direction, building its aesthetic around the principle of showing you exactly how everything was accomplished. The replays aren't just stylistic flourishes, they're proof of concept. The filmmaker is essentially saying, yes, that really happened, and here it is again from another angle to demonstrate that no wires or digital effects were involved. It's brazen and confident, and it transforms technical limitations into aesthetic strengths. Director Pradu and action choreographer Pradu constructed the film's visual language around this commitment to practical authenticity. Every major stunt sequence is shot with specific technical constraints designed to preserve credibility. Wide framing dominates, giving you full-body visibility so you can track exactly what's happening without cuts obscuring the action. Camera placement prioritizes geographic clarity. You always know where fighters are in relation to each other and their environment. The choice to minimize close-ups during fights isn't accidental, it's strategic, preventing the film from hiding anything behind rapid editing or selective framing. You see Tony Jaa's full body completing these movements because the whole point is demonstrating that a human being can actually do this. The cinematography by Kitakun operates within these constraints brilliantly. He uses natural lighting whenever possible, particularly in the village sequences, which gives those early scenes a documentary-like quality that contrasts sharply with Bangkok's harsher artificial illumination. The village is shown in warm, dusty daylight, soft shadows, open skies, the kind of unadorned visual simplicity that suggests nothing is being hidden or enhanced. When Ting arrives in Bangkok, the lighting shifts to neon, fluorescent overhead fixtures, the glare of headlights cutting through smog. It's not subtle symbolism, it's environmental storytelling through photographic choices, the camera itself distinguishing between authentic tradition and synthetic modernity. But where Kitakun's work really shines is in how he shoots movement. Watch the tuk-tuk chase, which is maybe the film's most technically ambitious sequence. The camera is often mounted on moving vehicles, tracking alongside or behind the action, bouncing over the same rough pavement that the tuk-tuk is navigating. This creates visceral immediacy. You feel the momentum, the velocity, the danger of tight corners taken too fast. But crucially, even in the chaos, the framing maintains spatial coherence. You can track where Ting is, where his pursuers are, what obstacles are approaching. Lesser action filmmaking would sacrifice geography for energy. Ong-Bak finds ways to deliver both simultaneously. The camera movement choices also reveal character priorities. During fight sequences, the camera rarely does dramatic push-ins or crash zooms. It mostly observes, tracking laterally or dollying back to accommodate multiple fighters entering the frame. This creates a sense of watching something real unfold rather than experiencing manufactured excitement. The camera behaves less like a participant in the action and more like an ideal witness, positioned perfectly to see everything, moving enough to stay relevant but never calling attention to itself at the expense of what's actually happening in front of it. Then there's the sound design, which does tremendous narrative work that's easy to overlook. The impacts in Ong-Bak are loud. Unnaturally loud, probably. Elbows and knees connecting with bodies, producing sounds like baseball bats hitting leather. It's a deliberate exaggeration, but it serves a specific purpose, translating the force of Muay Thai strikes into audio information that your body can process instinctively. You don't need to understand martial arts technique to flinch when you hear that crack. The sound design does the work of making you feel what the opponent is experiencing. It's visceral communication, bypassing intellectual analysis to hit you at a gut level. The ambient sound design creates equally important contrasts. The village sequences are filled with natural audio wind through trees, distant animal sounds, the soft rustle of daily activity, children's voices echoing across open space. Bangkok, by contrast, is orally overwhelming. Car horns, crowd noise layered thick, the mechanical hum of the city itself, conversations bleeding into each other until individual voices disappear into general chaos. Ting is frequently shot in Bangkok, surrounded by noise he's trying to navigate, the sound design emphasizing his status as an outsider, unable to parse the city's acoustic assault. When he fights, the audio often drops everything except the immediate sounds of combat breathing, impacts, footwork, creating islands of clarity within the urban cacophony. The editing by Sakchai Sherbanam makes specific choices that amplify the practical stunt work. Beyond the signature replays, there's a deliberate pacing rhythm to how fight sequences are structured. They typically begin with a few establishing wide shots to set geography, then shift into medium shots that let you see technique clearly, then occasionally punch into close-ups for critical impacts or reactions. But here's what's crucial. The cuts are timed to the action, not imposed on it. You can feel the editing responding to what Tony Jaa is doing, rather than creating artificial rhythm through cuts. When a sequence needs to breathe, the takes run longer. When energy needs to spike, the cuts quicken, but never into incomprehensible flash cutting. The film also uses editing to create contrast between Ting's disciplined efficiency and his opponent's chaotic aggression. Watch how fights are structured. Opponents often get rapid-fire cutting as they attack, multiple angles, quicker rhythm, emphasizing their frenetic energy. When Ting counters, the editing frequently settles into longer takes, holding on his movements to showcase precision and control. It's a subtle technique that reinforces character dynamics through editing language. Chaos gets chopped up. Discipline gets continuous coverage. The technical choice becomes a narrative argument about the superiority of trained technique over brute force. Pana Ridikai's fight choreography deserves particular attention because it's doing something conceptually different than most martial arts cinema. He's not creating balletic spectacle or wire-fu fantasy. He's staging demonstrations of actual Muay Thai applied in escalating scenarios. The choreography respects the art form's principles. Strikes come from hips and core rotation. Knees are driven upward using proper leg mechanics. Elbows are delivered at angles that maximize impact while minimizing risk to the striker. These aren't compromises for dramatic effect. They're the real techniques, performed correctly, just executed at superhuman speed and precision by Tony Jaa. What makes Ridikai's work special is how he stages fights to showcase different aspects of Muay Thai systematically. The early underground fight emphasizes basic strikes, standard kicks, punches, knee attacks, establishing baseline competency. The elimination gauntlet introduces defensive techniques, showing Ting's ability to evade, block, and counter multiple opponents simultaneously. The warehouse compound sequence incorporates environmental combat, demonstrating how Muay Thai adapts to confined spaces and improvised weapons. Each major fight feels like a different chapter in a textbook, progressively revealing the martial arts' versatility without ever feeling pedagogical or boring. The choreography also builds in moments of pure physical spectacle that push beyond strict realism into mythic territory. Ting's leap between the moving truck and SUV, his dive through a coiled circle of barbed wire during a chase sequence, the famous jump where he vaults through a series of progressively smaller gaps created by human arms. These moments are physically possible, No wires, no digital assistant, but they exist at the absolute edge of human capability. Riddick choreographs them with enough setup that you understand the difficulty, then stages them in long takes that prove they were genuinely accomplished. The technical achievement becomes part of the narrative impact. The production design by Akadak Kikot creates a visual thesis about cultural collision through environmental detail. Ban Non Pradu is built from natural materials, wood, thatch, stone, with architecture that's functional and unadorned. The temple is simple but maintained with obvious care, every surface cleaned, every offering carefully placed. There's a lived-in authenticity to the village design. Nothing looks like a set, everything suggests history and continuity. The Buddha statue itself is positioned as the visual center of the village, other structures oriented around it in a layout that physically manifests spiritual hierarchy. Bangkok's production design operates in deliberate opposition. The underground fight clubs are cramped, smoke-filled, lit with harsh single sources that create dramatic shadows and leave corners in darkness. Comtuan's operation blends legitimate business aesthetics with criminal functionality. Nice furniture alongside crated contraband, expensive art next to weapons. Don's compound is the ultimate expression of wealth-corrupting culture, sacred objects displayed like museum pieces, ripped from context and function, presented purely as visual commodities. The production design makes these spaces feel actively hostile to what Ting represents, environments where spiritual value has no currency. The film's use of location shooting adds tremendous textural authenticity. The Bangkok sequences were filmed in actual neighborhoods, real markets, genuine back alleys. You can see it in the backgrounds. Locals going about their business, authentic signage, the organic chaos of an actual city rather than a controlled set. This grounds even the most exaggerated action in physical reality. Yes, the stunts are incredible, but they're happening in spaces you could theoretically visit. The location work transforms Bangkok from generic urban setting into a specific character with its own visual personality. Director Prakya Pinkiu orchestrates all these technical elements with a clarity of vision that prioritizes readability. His direction style is relatively self-effacing. He's not calling attention to directorial virtuosity with showy camera moves or experimental editing. Instead, he's coordinating all the technical departments toward a unified goal, making Tony Jaa's physical performance and the stunt team's practical work as visible and impactful as possible. It's directorial craftsmanship in service of showcasing other craftsmanship, which takes a different kind of skill than auteurist self-expression. Pinkiu knows when to let a take run, when to cut, when to replay, when to shift angles, always in service of maximizing the audience's appreciation of what's actually being accomplished. His blocking choices during dialogue scenes also do subtle character work. Notice how Ting is frequently framed with open space around him in the village, but increasingly enclosed by tight framing in Bangkok. When Humle talks, he's often shot in cluttered frames, background activity, multiple planes of visual information, emphasizing the chaos he's embedded in. Muay Lake is frequently framed in doorways or against windows, literally positioned at thresholds, her character caught between different worlds. These aren't accidents. They're directorial choices that communicate character status through visual composition. The film also makes brilliant use of the reveal technique in its technical execution. The opening sequence, for instance, doesn't immediately showcase Tony Jaa's abilities. It introduces him quietly, lets him exist as a normal village presence, builds anticipation through restraint. When his skills are finally demonstrated, the impact is magnified by everything we didn't see earlier. This patience extends to how action sequences are spaced throughout the film, long enough between major fights that you're hungry for the next one, but consistent enough that momentum never fully dissipates. It's pacing as technical craft, understanding audience psychology, and feeding it precisely calibrated doses of spectacle. The stunt coordination, handled by Riddick's team, operates under constraints that would terrify most modern production. No safety wires means every fall is real, every landing is unassisted, every collision happens at actual speed. The famous sequence where Ting runs through a gauntlet of attackers in a narrow hallway, leaping over obstacles and sliding under barriers, was accomplished through rehearsal and timing rather than post-production magic. You can see the physical consequence in how Tony Jaa lands. Genuine impact, body-absorbing real force. The technical achievement isn't just that these stunts were performed. It's that they were performed repeatedly across multiple takes to get the coverage needed for editing. The film's approach to violence as technical craft deserves examination too. Fights are staged to hurt, not to kill, which creates specific choreographic choices. Ting's strikes are targeted at disabling rather than lethal points. Joints, muscles, areas that create immediate incapacitation without necessarily requiring medical intervention. This isn't accidental. It reflects Muay Thai's sporting context adapted for cinema. The technical choreography shows respect for the martial art's actual application, while acknowledging that movie violence needs to be more spectacular and less fatal than reality. It's a balancing act between authenticity and dramatic necessity, achieved through precise technical execution. The color grading choices by the post-production team reinforce the rural-urban divide established by other technical departments. The village scenes have warm color temperatures, golds, ambers, earth tones dominating the palette. Bangkok is cooler. Blues, greens, the sickly yellow of sodium vapor lights. These aren't extreme shifts into stylization, but they're noticeable enough to affect mood subconsciously. Your eye registers the warmth of home versus the coldness of the city before your brain consciously processes the difference. It's technical craft deployed in service of emotional communication. And then there's the title card technique, which is easy to miss but structurally important. The film occasionally uses simple text overlays to mark time or location transitions, but they're deployed sparingly and with deliberate rhythm. The opening credits are minimal, getting out of the way quickly to let the story begin. No elaborate title sequence, no stylistic indulgence, just the information needed, then straight into narrative. This reflects the overall technical philosophy, clarity, and efficiency, every choice justified by function, nothing decorative that doesn't also serve the story. The final technical element worth examining is how all these crafts combine during the climactic compound assault. That sequence integrates fight choreography, practical stunts, location shooting, sound design, editing rhythms, and camera movement into a sustained 10-minute demonstration of cinematic technique at peak coordination. Ting's initial theft of the Buddha head requires precise blocking. He has to move through a crowded space, grab the artifact, and reach the exit while maintaining spatial continuity. The courtyard fight requires coordinating multiple stunt performers, each with specific choreographed moments, while keeping Ting as the clear visual focal point. The vehicle chase demands camera cars, timing, location permits, and the willingness to destroy actual property for practical effect. What's remarkable is how smoothly these technical challenges are hidden behind narrative momentum. You're not thinking about how difficult the coordination must have been, you're invested in whether Ting escapes. That's the mark of technical craft operating at the highest level, when it's invisible in the moment, but reveals itself upon analysis. The filmmakers achieved something genuinely difficult. They made extraordinary technical accomplishment look like natural storytelling, hiding the seams so effectively that the spectacle feels inevitable rather than constructed. Ong-Bak proves that technical limitations can become creative opportunities when embraced rather than overcome. The decision to avoid CGI in wires wasn't just about authenticity, it forced every department to find practical solutions that resulted in a distinct visual identity. The cinematography had to capture real action, not green screen elements. The editing had to preserve takes long enough to prove authenticity, not just create rhythm through cuts. The sound design had to sell impacts that were genuinely happening, not digitally enhanced. The production design had to build environments that could withstand actual stunts, not just photograph well. Every technical choice circles back to the central commitment. Show it real, show it clear, trust the audience to appreciate the difficult. That trust pays off in credibility. When you watch Ong-Bak, you're not wondering how did they fake that. You're marveling at how did they do that. The technical transparency transforms viewing from passive entertainment into active appreciation of craft. You're not just watching a character complete a mission, you're witnessing artists at the peak of their disciplines collaborating to achieve something that pushes physical and technical boundaries simultaneously. And underneath all the spectacle, the technical choices consistently reinforce the thematic core. Tradition can survive modernity. Discipline can overcome chaos. Authentic craftsmanship still matters in a world of shortcuts and digital trickery. The camera shows it. The editing proves it. The sound design makes you feel it. And Tony Jaa's body, guided by Riddick's choreography and captured by Pinkyu's direction, turns technical philosophy into bone-cracking reality. The Buddha head isn't just stolen, it's assessed. Someone looked at Ong-Bak, calculated its age and authenticity, assigned it a market value, and added it to an inventory list alongside other items waiting for wealthy buyers. That transformation from sacred object to tradable commodity is where the film's deepest thematic work lives. It's not a subtle metaphor. The movie puts it right in front of you. Spiritual heritage, photographed for catalogs, priced in foreign currency, shipped across borders to sit in private collections, where context and meaning evaporate into pure aesthetics. What Ong-Bak is really interrogating isn't just one stolen statue, it's the entire mechanism by which culture gets extracted, sanitized, and sold back as decoration. This matters because the film was made at a specific moment in Thailand's negotiation with globalization. By 2003, Thailand had spent decades watching its cultural products flow outward, tourism packaging temples as exotic backdrops, international markets consuming Thai martial arts through filtered Hong Kong cinema, sacred traditions simplified into digestible content for foreign consumption. The anxiety isn't that Thai culture is disappearing, it's that it's being preserved in forms that strip away everything except what sells. A Buddha statue in a Western collector's home isn't carrying spiritual meaning anymore, it's demonstrating the owner's sophisticated taste and disposable income. The object survives, but its soul has been removed through transaction. Ting's entire journey becomes a metaphor for resisting that extraction. He's not just physically retrieving an artifact, he's refusing to accept that sacred things can be legitimately owned through purchase, that spiritual value can be converted into monetary equivalents, that tradition is negotiable if the price is high enough. Every fight he wins is an argument against the commodification logic that drives Kamtuan's operation and Don's collection. His body trained through spiritual discipline, powered by devotional commitment, stands in direct opposition to the idea that everything can be bought, sold, or controlled through economic leverage. The film layers this theme through the parallel economies operating in Bangkok's underworld. The fight clubs run on spectacle economy, bodies performing violence for gambling revenue, fighters reduced to their entertainment value, physical suffering transformed into profit for promoters and bookies. The artifact trade runs on prestige economy, cultural objects valued for their ability to signal wealth and worldliness, sacred significance irrelevant compared to rarity and provenance. Humlai operates in debt economy, constantly borrowing against future earnings, trapped in cycles of obligation where survival depends on finding the next hustle. These aren't separate systems, they're overlapping expressions of the same underlying philosophy that treats everything, bodies, beliefs, relationships, as fungible assets. Ting disrupts these economies by introducing something that can't be commodified, genuine faith. He's not fighting for money or status or survival. He's fighting because he promised to bring the Buddha head home, and that promise was made to a community whose entire relationship to Ong-Bak exists outside market logic. The village doesn't own the statue in any legal sense. They don't possess title or deed. Their claim is spiritual and historical. This object has protected us for generations. We've maintained it through devotion. Its presence matters in ways that can't be quantified. That's a completely different framework of value, and the film takes it seriously rather than dismissing it as naive sentimentality. Watch how the film handles the village's pooled money for Ting's journey. That cash represents actual sacrifice families, giving what little they can afford, elders contributing savings, the community choosing collective hope over individual security. When Humlai looks at that money, he sees opportunity to settle debts. When Ting looks at it, he sees responsibility he can't betray. The same physical currency carries entirely different meaning depending on the value system interpreting it. The film is arguing that economic value and spiritual value aren't just different, they're often incompatible, and choosing one frequently requires betraying the other. This tension extends to how Ong-Bak treats the body itself. Muay Thai, as practiced in the temple context, treats the body as a vessel for spiritual discipline. Training becomes meditation, technique becomes prayer. Physical cultivation serves moral development. The underground fight circuit treats bodies as expendable instruments for generating profit. Use them until they break, extract maximum entertainment value, discard when they stop being viable. Ting exists uncomfortably between these interpretations, forced to use his spiritually trained body in contexts that profane the training's original purpose. The film doesn't resolve this contradiction cleanly, which is what makes it thematically rich. Ting wins his fights using sacred technique deployed in profane environments. His Muay Thai remains technically pure, proper form, correct principles, but the context corrupts it. He's simultaneously honoring and violating his training with every strike. The movie suggests this kind of compromise is unavoidable when traditional values encounter modern systems designed to exploit them. You can maintain technical integrity while losing spiritual purity. You can succeed in your mission while failing your principle. The gap between those outcomes is where the film's thematic complexity lives. There's also a pointed critique of how modernization fractures community bonds. Humlai represents what happens when individuals are severed from collective identity and thrown into competitive urban environments. He's not evil. He's desperate and alone, trying to survive in a system that rewards only individual success and punishes any loyalty that interferes with self-interest. Bangkok doesn't recognize village bonds or sacred responsibilities. It only understands transactions and leverage. Humlai adapted by becoming transactional himself, and the film shows that adaptation is simultaneously necessary for survival and corrosive to soul. Muay Thai embodies a related but distinct trajectory, cynicism as defensive armor. She's seen enough exploitation to know that idealism is a luxury she can't afford. Her hardness isn't cruelty, it's protection against being used by a system built on using people. When she helps Ting, she's not suddenly believing that virtue will triumph. She's making a calculated bet that maybe, just this once, watching someone fight for something real will be worth the risk of caring. The film treats her cynicism sympathetically, understanding it as learned wisdom rather than moral failure, while also suggesting that cynicism is its own kind of tragedy, a narrowing of possibility, a preemptive surrender disguised as pragmatism. The rural-urban divide operates as more than just setting contrast. It's a thematic argument about different models of human flourishing. Nong Pradu is poor in monetary terms, but rich in social cohesion, spiritual meaning, and intergenerational continuity. Bangkok offers economic opportunity, but demands you abandon collective identity in favor of individual competition. The film doesn't romanticize village poverty. You see the hardship, the drought, the material limitations. But it also refuses to accept that wealth accumulation equals progress if the cost is losing everything that makes community meaningful. This puts Ong-Bak in conversation with larger post-colonial anxieties about modernization and cultural sovereignty. Thailand was never formally colonized, but it's been subject to economic and cultural pressures that function similarly. Western capital flows requiring institutional adaptation, global markets demanding cultural products in easily consumable forms, development paradigms that treat traditional practices as obstacles to overcome rather than wisdom to preserve. The stolen Buddha head becomes a synecdoche for these larger dynamics, the West, or more accurately, global capital, taking what it wants from Thai culture, stripping it of context, and displaying it as trophy. Ting's refusal to accept this arrangement carries political resonance beyond the individual story. He's asserting that Thai cultural heritage isn't available for purchase regardless of price, that sacred objects belong to communities that created and maintain them, that economic power doesn't grant legitimate ownership over spiritual property. These aren't just plot points. They're positions in ongoing debates about cultural patrimony, repatriation of artifacts, and who has rightful claim to objects taken during periods of unequal power dynamics. The film also explores violence as a language with moral grammar. Not all violence is equivalent in Ong-Bak. Ting's defensive combat, used to protect sacred objects and his own survival, is visually and narratively distinguished from the opportunistic brutality of Don's enforcers or the spectacle violence of the underground circuit. The choreography itself makes moral arguments. Ting's efficient, targeted strikes that disable without killing contrast with opponents' wild, potentially lethal attacks. The film suggests violence has ethical dimensions based on intent, context, and restraint. It can be a necessary response to injustice without being an unqualified good. This creates space for examining the paradox at Muay Thai's historical heart. The martial art emerged from Thailand's need to defend sovereignty against aggressive neighbors, training bodies for warfare while embedding that training in Buddhist spiritual practice. It's simultaneously violent and meditative, combat technique, and religious devotion. Ong-Bak doesn't try to resolve that paradox. It inhabits the tension, showing Ting struggle with exactly these contradictions. Can you honor Buddhist principles of non-harm while breaking bones in self-defense? Can violence be sacred? The film answers yes, uncomfortably, and that discomfort is the point. There's another layer examining authenticity versus performance. Ting's Muay Thai is authentic, real technique, genuine training, no performative flourishes. The fight clubs, traffic in performance, spectacle for audiences, violence is entertainment, skill commodified into show. When Ting enters those rings, he brings authenticity into spaces designed for performance, and the collision is thematically significant. His refusal to showboat or play to crowds isn't just character trait, it's resistance to the demand that even traditional practices be translated into entertaining performance for consumer audiences. The film extends this to examine tourism and cultural authenticity more broadly. Though Ong-Bak doesn't explicitly show tourists, Don's collection of sacred objects represents the tourist impulse taken to its logical, extreme consuming culture as aesthetic experience. Extracting objects from living practice, curating authentic traditions in contexts that render them inauthentic by definition. A Buddha statue in a private museum isn't functioning as Buddha statue anymore, it's functioning as art object, its spiritual purpose terminated through recontextualization. This connects to questions of cultural translation and what gets lost in transmission. When Muay Thai appears in international cinema, filtered through Hong Kong production styles or Hollywood sensibilities, it's been translated in ways that often strip its cultural specificity. Ong-Bak was conscious of the production deliberately emphasized Thai-ness, shooting in Thai locations, using Thai crew, centering Thai cultural concerns, refusing to make the film palatable through familiar Western action convention. It's asserting that Thai stories can be told on Thai terms and still find global audiences. The theme of intergenerational responsibility runs throughout, though not always obviously. Ting isn't fighting for himself, he's fighting for elders who entrusted him with their sacred object and children who will inherit whatever cultural world his generation leaves behind. The weight he carries is historical and forward-looking simultaneously. If he fails, it's not just this Buddha head that's lost, it's the principle that communities can protect what they hold sacred against systems designed to commodify everything. The stakes are bigger than plot mechanics. There's also subtextual examination of masculinity and violence. Ting's manhood isn't proven through aggression or dominance. His masculinity is expressed through responsibility, discipline, and the willingness to endure suffering for communal benefit. This offers an alternative to toxic models where male worth is determined by capacity for violence. Ting fights not because fighting proves he's a man, but because the specific situation demands skills he happens to possess. His reluctance to fight, far from undermining his masculinity, is treated as evidence of maturity and moral seriousness. The film's treatment of faith itself is remarkably grounded. Ting's Buddhism isn't mystical or supernatural, it's practical devotion expressed through daily practice, community ritual, and ethical commitment. The Buddha head doesn't have magical protective powers in any literal sense. Its value is entirely social and spiritual. It focuses community identity, serves as physical anchor for collective belief, represents continuity across generations. The film takes this seriously without requiring audiences to share the religious framework. You don't have to believe in Buddhist philosophy to understand why the statue matters to people who do. This creates thematic space for examining how secular and sacred worldviews clash. Dan and Kamtuan operate in entirely secular frameworks where value is determined by market demand and power by accumulated capital. They literally cannot comprehend why someone would risk his life for a carved stone that could be replaced with insurance money. Their incomprehension isn't stupidity, it's the natural result of inhabiting value systems where spiritual concerns are categorized as irrational sentiment. The film doesn't mock their perspective, but it does reject it as incomplete, a way of understanding the world that captures economic reality while remaining blind to everything that can't be quantified. Ultimately, Ong-Bak builds toward a thematic statement about what makes life meaningful in contexts where traditional meaning-making systems are under assault. It's not offering easy answers or suggesting that simply preserving tradition solves modern challenges. Ting returns to the village transformed and damaged, carrying physical and spiritual scars that won't heal cleanly. The Buddha head is restored, but the systems that enabled its theft remain intact. Dan still runs his collection. Kamtuan still smuggles artifacts. The economic pressures forcing villages like Nong Pradu into poverty haven't changed. The victory is small and local and temporary, but the film argues that small, local, temporary victories are worth fighting for anyway. Because the alternative, accepting that everything is for sale, that tradition can't survive modernization, that community bonds will inevitably fracture under economic pressure, is a surrender that guarantees the outcome you fear. Ting fighting impossible odds isn't naive idealism. It's the only response available to people who refuse to accept that the world's cruelty is inevitable and unchangeable. He won't fix Bangkok's corruption or stop global capitalism from commodifying Thai culture. But he can bring this particular Buddha head back to this particular village, and that matters absolutely to the people depending on him. The thematic core, then, isn't really about whether sacred things can survive in profane systems. It's about whether individuals can maintain spiritual and ethical integrity while operating in environments designed to destroy both. Ting's body becomes a battlefield where that question gets answered. His Muay Thai training says one thing, Bangkok's demands say another, and every fight is him navigating the impossible middle ground. The film doesn't pretend this navigation is clean or cost-free, but it insists the navigation is necessary, that the struggle itself has meaning even when the outcome remains uncertain. And maybe that's the most honest thematic statement available. Resistance to commodification won't stop commodification, but it will preserve your humanity in the face of systems designed to reduce you to economic function. The Buddha head returns home not because good triumphs over evil, but because one person refused to accept that sacred value can be legitimately overridden by monetary value, and he was willing to bleed to prove that refusal wasn't just empty rhetoric. In the world Ong-Bak builds, that's not everything, but it's enough. February 2005. A screening room in New York City. American distributors watching a Thai film most of them can barely pronounce. Then, Tony Jaa jumps through a coil of barbed wire, lands in a perfect role, and immediately springs into a fight sequence that involves zero wires, zero CGI, and a level of physical commitment that makes everyone in the room sit forward in their seats. By the time the tuk-tuk chase finishes, actual vehicles, actual Bangkok streets, actual insanity, the bidding war has already started. Ong-Bak hadn't just arrived in the American market, it had kicked the door down with a flying knee and announced that action cinema had been playing it safe for too long. The film's international rollout became a phenomenon precisely because it offered something audiences didn't know they were starving for: consequence. In an era dominated by CGI spectacle and wire-enhanced martial arts that looked beautiful but felt weightless, Ong-Bak landed with the blunt force of actual physics. Bodies hit the ground hard, elbows connected with real impact. When Tony Jaa crashed through obstacles, you could see him absorb the collision, feel the danger in his recovery time. Critics and audiences responded with the shock of recognition. This is what action used to feel like before digital safety nets made everything consequence-free. The film wasn't just entertaining, it was a corrective, reminding the industry that visceral physicality still mattered in an age of pixels and post-production enhancement. Box office numbers told part of the story. Modest production budget, massive returns. Ong-Bak earned over $20 million worldwide against a budget rumored to be less than $1 million. Extraordinary numbers for a Thai-language film with no international stars and limited distribution infrastructure. But the real impact wasn't measured in revenue, it was measured in how quickly the film became cult currency. Action fans traded bootlegs before official releases reached their regions. Martial arts forums dissected the choreography frame by frame. YouTube, still in its infancy, became flooded with clips of the film's signature moments, each view another data point proving that practical action wasn't obsolete, it had just been abandoned prematurely. Tony Jaa transformed from regional stunt performer to international action icon almost overnight. The trajectory is worth examining because it reveals how Ong-Bak functioned as a calling card for an entire approach to filmmaking. Jaa had been working in Thai cinema for years, doing stunts and bit parts, training relentlessly in Muay Thai and gymnastics, waiting for an opportunity that seemed unlikely to arrive. Ong-Bak gave him that platform, and his performance didn't just showcase individual talent, it demonstrated what was possible when you prioritized authentic martial arts technique over marketable movie star charisma. He couldn't match Jackie Chan's comic timing or Jet Li's balletic grace, but he offered something they hadn't: pure Muay Thai, unfiltered and uncompromised, performed at a level that forced everyone to recognize the art form's cinematic potential. The film's influence on action choreography became visible within years. You can trace a direct line from Ong-Bak's success to the resurgence of practical stunt work in major production. The Bourne film's handheld, grounded fight sequences, the Raid's brutal Indonesian silent combat, John Wick's emphasis on visible technique and spatial coherence. These productions didn't copy Ong-Bak directly, but they absorbed its lesson. Audiences will respond to action that feels physically real, that lets them track what's happening, that trusts human capability instead of digital enhancement. The film proved there was commercial viability in saying, "We actually did this," rather than "we made it look like we did this." For Thai cinema specifically, Ong-Bak represented a watershed moment in international visibility. Thailand had been producing films for decades, but most never escaped regional markets or were known primarily through exploitation and B-movie circuits. Ong-Bak arrived as a legitimate theatrical release in major markets, treated seriously by critics, discussed in mainstream film coverage. It opened doors for subsequent Thai productions, Tom Yum Goong, Chocolate, the Ong-Bak sequels, and established that Thai action cinema could compete globally on its own terms, without requiring Western co-production or compromising cultural specificity for broader appeal. The film also sparked renewed global interest in Muay Thai as a martial art. Gems reported increased enrollment from students who'd seen Ong-Bak and wanted to learn the techniques that looked so devastating on screen. This wasn't just martial arts tourism, it represented genuine curiosity about the cultural and technical foundations of the style. The film showed Muay Thai as complete fighting system clinch work, elbow strikes, knee attacks, the famous leg kicks, rather than the simplified version that had appeared in previous international productions. That authenticity created demand for authentic instruction, benefiting Thai trainers and gyms while spreading understanding of the art form's cultural context. But Ong-Bak's legacy isn't entirely straightforward, and examining the complications reveals important truths about how films influence industry. The sequels and follow-ups never quite captured what made the original special. Ong-Bak 2 and 3 were period pieces with bigger budgets and more elaborate production design, but they lost the lean, desperate energy of Ting's journey through Bangkok. Tony Jaa's subsequent solo projects faced similar challenges. technically impressive but lacking the thematic coherence that gave the first film weight beyond its action sequences. This suggests that Ong-Bak's impact wasn't just about discovering a talented performer or proving practical stunts could succeed. It was about the specific alchemy of story, performance, technique, and cultural anxiety coming together in a particular moment. Tony Jaa broke bones, tore ligaments, and pushed his body to limits that medical professionals would consider reckless. The famous "no wires, no CGI" marketing was accurate, but also slightly disingenuous about the human cost. As Ong-Bak's influence grew, it forced industry discussions about where the line exists between impressive commitment and exploitative danger. If practical stunts become an expectation rather than a choice, are performers being pressured into risking permanent injury for audience entertainment? The film's legacy includes not just the techniques it popularized, but the ethical questions it raised about how far performers should go for authenticity. Critically, Ong-Bak received mixed academic attention that's worth examining. Action genre scholars appreciated the technical craftsmanship and cultural specificity, praising the film's commitment to showcasing Muay Thai authentically. Cultural critics noted its thematic engagement with globalization and commodification, reading Ting's journey as allegory for Thailand's negotiation with modernity. But some reviewers criticized the plot as thin, the acting as functional at best, the characters as underdeveloped beyond their action functions. These critiques aren't wrong exactly, but they miss what the film was optimizing for. Ong-Bak subordinates traditional narrative complexity to physical storytelling, and judging it by dramatic standards ignores its accomplishments in kinetic communication. The film's influence extends into unexpected corners of pop culture. Video game developers studied Ong-Bak's fight choreography to improve motion capture for combat mechanics, particularly in games emphasizing martial arts realism. Stunt coordinators used it as teaching tool, showing students how to maximize impact while maintaining safety through precise technique and timing. Fitness influencers incorporated Muay Thai elements popularized by the film into workout routines. These might seem like minor cultural ripples, but collectively they represent how thoroughly Ong-Bak penetrated global consciousness, not just as a film people watched, but as a reference point that changed how people thought about bodies, combat, and physical possibility. 20-plus years later, the film's techniques still hold up in ways that CGI-heavy contemporaries don't. Watch action films from 2003-2005 that relied on digital effects for fight sequences or stunt work. Many look dated now, the technology insufficient to create convincing movement. Ong-Bak looks as visceral and immediate as the day it was released because practical action doesn't age the same way. Tony Jaa's knee strikes still connect with the same bone-jarring impact. The tuk-tuk chase still generates genuine tension because you're watching real vehicles navigate real obstacles. The film built its aesthetic on physical reality, which gives it a temporal immortality that digital contemporaries can't match. There's also an interesting legacy in how Ong-Bak influenced Western perceptions of Southeast Asian cinema broadly. Before this film, American and European audiences mostly encountered Southeast Asian cinema through art house drama or horror. Ong-Bak demonstrated that the region could produce world-class action that didn't require Western creative input or Hollywood distribution to reach global audience. It paved the way for Indonesian, Vietnamese, and Filipino action films to find international distribution, creating market infrastructure and audience appetite that hadn't existed before. The film essentially said, Southeast Asia is producing incredible action cinema, and you've been missing it. Then proved the statement so definitively that distributors started actively seeking out similar content. For Tony Jaa, personally, the legacy is complicated by the career trajectory that followed. He became internationally famous, landed roles in Hollywood productions, achieved the recognition any regional performer dreams about. But the specific physical demands of his style, the refusal to use wires or stunt doubles, the insistence on doing everything himself proved unsustainable over a long career. Injuries accumulated. The kinds of stunts that made Ong-Bak revolutionary became progressively harder to execute as his body aged. He's still working, still impressive, but unable to match the raw physicality of his breakthrough performance. This creates poignant subtext when revisiting the original. You're watching someone at the absolute peak of physical capability, doing things he'll never be able to repeat, in a specific moment that can't be recreated or extended. The film's impact on how martial arts are filmed deserves its own examination. Before Ong-Bak, the dominant paradigm for shooting fights came from Hong Kong's wire fu tradition, or American rapid-cut concealment. Ong-Bak popularized the wide-frame, long-take approach that trusted choreography and performer skill over editorial trickery. Now you see this technique everywhere. The Raid uses it, the John Wick franchise employs it, even Marvel films occasionally adopt it for specific sequences. The film taught an entire generation of filmmakers that you can create spectacular action by stepping back and letting audiences see the full scope of what's happening rather than cutting around limitations. There's also legacy in what Ong-Bak represented for practical stunt communities worldwide. Stunt performers and coordinators often felt undervalued in an industry increasingly reliant on digital effects. This film became a rallying point, proof that their craft still mattered, that practical skills could deliver experiences CGI couldn't replicate. The pride the stunt community took in Ong-Bak's success translated into renewed advocacy for recognition credits, awards eligibility, better safety standards. The film didn't single-handedly change industry practices, but it gave stunt professionals ammunition when arguing for their value and protection. Culturally, Ong-Bak occupies an interesting position in Thailand's own film history. It's simultaneously celebrated as international breakthrough and critiqued for potentially perpetuating reductive stereotypes about Thailand as exotic action playground. Some Thai critics appreciated the global recognition, but worried the film's success would pigeonhole Thai cinema into action genre expectations, making it harder for dramas, comedies, or experimental works to find international distribution. This tension, pride in achievement versus concern about limiting representation, mirrors larger debates about how cultures engage with global markets without being reduced to their most commercially viable elements. The film's thematic concerns about cultural commodification have only become more relevant as time passes. In 2003, the internet was just beginning to accelerate global cultural exchange. Now, in 2026, those dynamics have intensified exponentially. Traditions turned into viral content, sacred practices mined for aesthetic elements, cultural specificity smoothed into algorithm-friendly universality. Ong-Bak's core anxiety about sacred objects being stolen and sold has aged into prescience about digital age cultural extraction. The mechanisms have changed. It's not physical artifacts in private collections anymore, but cultural products decontextualized and remixed for social media virality. But the underlying concern remains urgent. Perhaps the most lasting legacy is simply proving that regional cinema could speak globally without compromising itself. Ong-Bak didn't try to be a Hollywood film made in Thailand. It centered Thai cultural concerns, shot in Thai locations, used Thai creative personnel, and trusted that specificity would translate across cultural boundaries. That trust was validated by the film's success, providing a template for other regional cinemas. You don't have to sand off your cultural edges to reach international audiences. Sometimes the edges are exactly what makes you compelling. The lesson has reverberated through world cinema, encouraging filmmakers to lean into rather than away from their specific context. And here, at the end, it's worth returning to that opening image, an elbow connecting with force that makes audiences gasp, a body moving with precision that seems impossible, a promise kept despite overwhelming odds. Ong-Bak endures not because it perfected action cinema, it didn't, but because it remembered something essential that the industry had temporarily forgotten. That bodies matter, that physical reality generates its own spectacle, that authenticity creates investment no amount of digital enhancement can manufacture. That sometimes the most revolutionary act is refusing to compromise what you know is true. The Buddha head made it home. Tony Jaa made it to international recognition. Thai action cinema made it onto the global stage. Practical stunt work made it back from obsolescence. And somewhere right now someone is watching Ong-Bak for the first time, seeing that knee strike connect, feeling that visceral impact translate through the screen, and remembering what action cinema can be when it trusts bodies to tell stories that words never could. The promise was kept. The shockwaves are still spreading.